Well, let's stay with the war in Ukraine now. And a source close to the White House National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, says he has held confidential talks with senior Russian officials aimed at reducing the risk of a broader war. Meanwhile, Russian forces are conducting new counter-offensives in the Donbass and are preparing for a new battle in Kherson. Well, joining me now is our defence and security analyst, Michael Clarke. Hi to you, Michael. Thanks for joining us. So these reports of potential talks between the US and Russia on the use of strategic nuclear weapons, how different is that from the back channels that we know exist already regarding nuclear weapons between Washington and Moscow?
Yeah, I mean, these back channels, take place all the time. These sorts of communications are fairly standard. So Jake Sullivan is the National Security Advisor in Washington, and so he's an important insider. He's an important character in this respect. And Jake Sullivan, quite a youngish guy, actually, but he's very influential with Joe Biden and the team. And the man he's talking to, in a sense, is his counterpart in the Kremlin, which is Yuri Uzhikov, and there he is on the left. Again, a senior man. He's not a minister, he's not foreign minister, not the defence minister. But if you talk to Uzhikov, then you know that Putin will hear it. And what they are talking about, I think, is make sure that there are no accidents. In all crises, accidents tend to happen. Cuba crisis, 80 years ago, this last month just passed, was full of near misses, full of accidents. And so what they're saying is, let's make sure that there are no accidents. But also, they're saying, I'm fairly sure, don't misunderstand us. The Americans will be saying to the Russians, through Uzhikov, don't even think about nuclear use. Don't even think about it, because we've gamed it out. We know what we will do, and we will react very, very strongly. They may specify what they'll do, maybe they won't. But it's a way of saying to the Russians, keeping the pressure on the Russians, don't even think about escalation that you are gladly talking about. I mean, Putin's speeches are full of escalatory rhetoric, and the Americans are just saying, tone it down. And to be honest, in the last couple of weeks, some of the nuclear rhetoric coming out of Russia does seem to have been toned down. So I suspect these talks may be having the desired effect.
Certainly sobering stuff, nonetheless, that we're even discussing nuclear weapons, isn't it? Now, let's talk about what's happening on the battlefield. The latest in the eastern Donbass, Michael. There's been some pretty harrowing reports coming out.
Lots of big stuff happening.
Yeah.
I mean, the big battle is that the Ukrainians are attacking between Svatove and Kremina. They're trying to break that line, which the Russians are holding, the P66 highway, between those two places. That's a key battle. But right in the middle of that, between Svatove and Kremina, at Makivka, the Russians are counterattacking quite strongly. So it's quite a small place, Makivka, but they've pushed out to about 15 kilometres, about 25 kilometres north to south, and it's quite a big counterattack. The Ukrainians, in a sense, have let them come. They've gone to the high ground west of Makivka, and they're now artillery barraging the Russians. But that's a pretty big attack, and the Russians are trying to break this stranglehold which the Ukrainians have established over Svatove, Kremina and the P66, very important highway. Further south of Bakhmut, the Wagner group, who are the mercenaries who work for the Kremlin, they've been attacking Bakhmut for about 4 weeks now. Very, very powerful attacks, but they still haven't taken it. And we know from what's been happening at Bakhmut, they've got convicts in the front line, they've got mobilised men behind them and regulars behind them. And the regulars in the third line are known as the barrier troops, and their job is to shoot any of the convicts or the mobilised men who retreat. This is what they used to do at Stalingrad in the Second World War, shoot anyone who retreats. That's the way they're fighting at Bakhmut, and they're losing an enormous number of men, and they still haven't taken it. So both on the P66 highway and at Bakhmut, the Russians are losing a lot of people. And at Pavlivka, even further south, near Donetsk, the whole of most of the 155 Marine Brigade, the Russian 155 Marine Brigade, looks as if it's suffered terribly. It's been almost wiped out. And there's a lot of comment on Russian channels, back channels, and their social media about all of this. The Russian media won't cover it. The Kremlin says, oh, we've lost about 2%. No, they haven't. They've lost well over 50% of the 155th Marine Brigade. So it's really hurting them.
And what is the latest in the southern city of Kherson? We've been waiting for a big Ukrainian counteroffensive there for weeks now, but certainly it seems like things are moving.
Yeah, it's changing. What the Russians are doing, they are moving to the eastern side of the Dnipro River, and so they're getting out of Kherson city, but they're leaving troops behind, both mobilised troops in dug-in positions and, reportedly, a lot of regular troops in civilian clothes. And there's a sort of reign of terror apparently taking place now. There's only about 60,000 people still in Kherson, 300,000 originally, about 60,000 now. And they're picking people up off the streets. And what the Russians seem to be trying to do is to encourage the Ukrainians, when they attack Kherson, which they will, to turn it into a series of street battles in which it will appear that the Ukrainians are shooting fellow Ukrainians. And Russian TV crews have turned up in the last 48 hours in Kherson to film all of this. So they're setting themselves up for what looks like a very nasty, as it were, a battle of propaganda as well as a battle. And meanwhile, the Ukrainians are moving against Novokakhovka. That's important because Novokakhovka controls the access to Kherson and the important dam at Novokakhovka that we've talked about many times. That dam is critical both to the possibility of flooding further downstream. If the Russians blow the dam, it will flood the valley right through to Kherson. I mean, it would take about 19 hours for the floodwaters to get to the Black Sea, but they will get there. But also, it will cut off the canal, the main canal that runs from the dam right down to Crimea to supply water to Crimea. So it's a big thing to do. But if the Ukrainians look as if they are about to take Novokakhovka, the betting is the Russians will blow the dam, and then there's a new situation.
Meanwhile, 60,000 civilians are in the firing line down there. Michael,
Absolutely.
thank you.